This is Real Politics.
Well, there you go. It just wants to play all over again. We have to fix that particular name at some point. Hey, what do you all think of that video? It's really cool. I am actually trying to share the live stream on my Facebook, but for some reason it won't let me share. So on my own personal page, which is okay, I guess. Hey, guys. This is Roman Bettis, Sir Roman. That's what I'm going to call myself today for fun. If you want to unmute, there you go. Today we have Boss Lady Madi with us, the former Chief of Staff for State Representative Aaron Pena. How are you doing, Madi de Leon?
Hi, guys. Tired. Had a long, busy day.
That's not good. And we also have with us Cruz Quintana, the man, the tech guru right over here. Hey, Cruz, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
And Cruz is the part of the executive committee in Hidalgo County GOP. And with us today is an awesome, totally special guest, a good friend of mine, I'm not going to say a good friend of the pod, but I'm just going to say a good friend of the pod. Zach Maxwell. He is the Chief of Staff for State Representative Lang, if I'm not mistaken, right, Lang? All right. And that is him. And he will be Chief of Staff for a little bit longer, right? How much longer are you going to be Chief of Staff with him?
Just a few more days, actually.
Cool. But that is his title. And then he goes off into the private sector, right? That what you're going to be doing? Wow. Yep. There you go. You see, you go and you serve government, and then you leave and you go and help the private sector. That's what Republicans and conservatives do, right, Zach?
That's right.
And Cruz, if you want to put up some of those comments that we're getting, I saw one comment that called me a nerd, so you might as well put that one up there. Roman is a nerd. I am. So this will be an interactive live stream. I am a nerd, and Robert is a good friend. You see, Robert, I'm even wearing like were you at the Cowboy Pro Shop when Reebok was in charge of the cowboy stuff? I don't know. So, hey, nice. Thank you so much, Maria Magdalena Aguilar Grandal. Hey, Mari, how you doing? Like the video, but remove 3 people from there. Okay, just so you know, these are people that we have interviewed on the show, and maybe in about a month, we will add new people that we've interviewed, and Zach will probably be on there at some point. So we're going to have to get some sort of magical picture of him. And so that's what we'll be doing. Guys, today we will be interviewing Zach and asking him a ton of questions about the Texas legislature. So get your questions prepared. Put them on there. We have several topics we want to talk about. And with those topics, it'll lead us to more topics. So if you have a specific question you want to ask Zach about the legislature, and you have an experienced person in the legislature, and you have somebody who used to be in the legislature with Madi, who I'm sure will be able to assist and help in any questions you might have about what the legislature is all about. And you'll just have me asking the questions because I know nothing about it. I'm just kidding. Anyway, hey, David. So, Zach, tell us a little bit about yourself first, and give you a minute or two so you can tell us who you are.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you guys so much for having me on your show. Big fan of all of you. I kind of got my start in the grassroots. Went to Baylor University. I was on the chairman of the Young Conservatives of Texas out there in Waco, and that's kind of how I got my political start. I've worked on campaigns, from the governor's campaign to Ted Cruz's campaign as an intern volunteer, but then also Texas state Senate races all over the state, Texas House races all over the state. I've worked in the Senate. I've worked in the House, where I currently serve for Representative Mike Lang, the former Freedom Caucus chairman, and he is retiring. So that means I am retiring, but I have an extensive knowledge of, the inner workings of the Capitol from a conservative's perspective, that, seeks to further the conservative movement and good Republican legislation.
Yeah. Zach, what exactly is the job of a chief of staff in the Texas legislature?
Sure, that's a great question. So my job as a chief of staff in the Texas legislature, in the Texas House specifically, the Texas Senate has a lot more staffers. So the term chief of staff has a little bit more meaning in the Senate because there's so much more staff. Marty may disagree with me, but we definitely, we have a staff in the office, and I am over them, and I'm in charge of helping set the tone for the office and for the district with the representative. I am him whenever he is on the floor or he is, in another capacity doing official business. And so I would normally take a lot of meetings in the office. In the event that he isn't there, I would help set the legislative agendas and actually put them in motion and put them forward. Be kind of the representative's right-hand man, if you will, in the Texas legislature. So we're jack of all trades, master of all. Basically, you just have to be in the Texas legislature because it's cutthroat and you got to be ready to go. So.
And and this upcoming Texas legislature is going to be a little bit different. We're going to have a new Texas speaker. We've had only, I think, one term of David Bonin, Speaker Bonin, and now he's no longer going to be speaker. He's retiring himself. And so we're going to have a new speaker. I know that you've worked well with his staff when he was just a lowly representative over in East Texas. So who is the new speaker, and how did that come about to make him a speaker? So those of us in the Valley who may not understand what that entails.
Sure. And so to be clear, he is the presumptive new speaker. And he was elected within the Republican caucus. He was kind of presumed to be the speaker for the last, 3 or 4 weeks, as people started announcing, people started running, for the position and there was a few notables on there that were on the list of people that wanted to be speaker, but ultimately Dade Phelan won it out of everybody. He's a real nice guy. On the conservative scale, if you look at those rankings, he is a little bit lower. When I say a little, he's a lot lower on the list. However, I will tell you one thing that conservatives have been fighting for a very, very long time is somebody who will stay out of the process and let the body do the job that it is supposed to do. Because for a long time under Speaker Strauss and a little bit under Bonin, not quite as much, not near as much as we saw under Speaker Strauss, but speakers usually have a lot of power within the process to squash certain pieces of legislation, kind of maneuver around in the House, such as appoint the committee chairs, and then they kind of all work together to do whatever legislative agenda they feel as though the Texas House needs to do. But Dade Phelan, it's my opinion that I think, especially having worked with his staff in the past and worked with him in the past, he is a very friendly member. He is, unless he just has a really, really strong conviction, which he's a Republican. So I mean, on pro-life issues, on Second Amendment issues, anything like that, I don't think that we would ever have a problem with anything like that, unless it was just extreme far left. I don't think that we would have a problem with him causing any road bumps in the process. I think he'll appoint some solid committee chairmen. Some of them will probably not be so solid, but so long as he allows the process to work and he doesn't get politics into it and personalities, which is another big problem that we have in the legislature, is that people put personalities and politics over policy. And I have a good feeling, only time will tell, but I have a good feeling about this legislative session, given my experience.
Hey, Jessica. Jessica is one of our BIC trustees, and one of the questions I'm going to ask you was about charter schools. So I'll allow Madi to ask a few questions, and because Madi's jumping at the bit, I know. Madi, feel free.
Hey, what do you think is going to happen with charter schools this upcoming session? I know that the conversation has changed a bit in the last couple of sessions from, school vouchers to parental control. Where are we at now? Not fully polished with the wording of how it's being used and how they're moving it forward. So has it changed much, or is it still almost the same?
Honestly, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Obviously, this last session was a big public education session. And I kind of foresaw that in 2017, during the 2017 session, because there was a lot of stuff that folks were trying to push, and there was a big momentum growing, and you saw that in the campaign cycle before this last session in 2019. And so I know some lobbyists in the public education sector as well as in the charter school sector, and I've kind of kept up with them. That's something that's near and dear to my heart is public education and the charter versus parental rights and actually being able to choose for their children. I'm a big believer in that. But the discussion overall really hasn't changed a whole lot. The public education lobby, if you lump in the tax funded lobby, the Texas Association of School Boards, Texas Association of School Administrators, Texas Association of superintendents. I mean, there's literally just a plethora of associations, and I would consider that world to be the strongest political arm in Austin. And so the fight for charter schools and expansion of rights and their ability to be able to grow is very difficult within the Texas legislature. And really, I would expect to see that across the nation because of the public school lobbies and associations that fight so hard to keep charter schools out of there. So I can tell you that we fought pretty hard for some good, solid. We got some stuff in 2017. We didn't get near as much as we wanted in 2019 this last session, just because it was a big. Everybody was talking about HB3 and property taxes, so that was a big.
Hi Jade. We'll try not to be. We're going to be very organized today, so we need more conservative state representative. Zach, you should consider on running in the near future. Robert is putting you on the spot. Typical Cowboy fan, right? He's the manager. He's the manager of the pro shop in Brownsville. So if you ever come down and you're a Cowboy fan, visit him.
Awesome. Yeah, you better believe it. Go boys. I'm in Granbury, so Fort DFW area is just right down the road. I've been a few times myself. But yeah, I don't know what my political future looks like. I'll obviously always be involved in some capacity or whatever, but I've got young kids. I've got a soon-to-be 1-year-old daughter, Lucy, and an 8 and 9-year-old son and daughter. And so before I decided to go really hard in the paint with any actual service like that, I'd probably want to see them out of the house. But I definitely will be involved, and coming on shows like this, making sure people are educated on the issues, following along what's going on in Austin, and just being involved locally. Because I think that's really local politics is, I think, really where a lot of us need to focus. Because one thing that me and my boss realized this last session and really hit us hard is that a lot of the fights that we had in Austin, we can fix them right here at the local level. Just like property taxes are not levied at the state level. Sure, they have a lot to do with it with public education. And there's some nuances in there that if anybody would like to really nerd out, I can go into specifics for you, but I might put you to sleep. But they're all levied at the local level. Your city councils, your county commissioners, your school boards, your MUD districts, public utility districts. I mean, they're the ones that actually levy the property taxes, and they're the ones that ride the appraisals and all that and stuff. And so a lot of that stuff, especially from the fiscal side, we could handle right here at the local level. So
with us here, sorry, Chris.
I'd like to address that, Zach. The appraisal values are mandated by the state. It's a kind of a finger pointing, because the state says you need to be at 10% of valuation of this space.
That's right.
So the county or whoever says, okay, the appraisal district needs to come in, let's raise the rates or lower the rates, or they can say, we're going to stay the same. Look what we did for you. At the same time, the state appraisal is telling the local appraisals, you need to come in at X above or X amount from base.
Yeah.
So the state does have a lot to do with it.
Well, yes, the state does have a lot to do with appraisals. And it's important to understand the difference between appraisals and the actual tax rate. And so I definitely understand the confusion with some of that stuff because I think it's by design. And of course, all the local level politicians want to tell you, oh, look, I kept the taxes the same. What do you mean you got charged more? The tax rate's the same. Or, oh, I lowered the tax rate, but they're still collecting more revenue because appraisals went out the roof. And so right now, you have to think of appraisals as it's a public it's a private sector, free market. So the comptroller's office, they watch the trends, they watch the growth, they see where we're at with within the economy of So if appraisals increase, say, I think they went up 7% last year, I think, if I'm correct. And that means that, across the state, we should see a 7% increase in overall appraisals. And then the state sends down to the taxing entities, they say, especially with the school districts, they'll say, well, your appraisals should increase, either side of 2% of 7%. So they can go up, 2% higher, lower 2% higher, but they should be within that increase of 7%, or 5 to 9. And so with the taxing entities, that's why it was so important to have this the Transparency Act that we passed last session, was to better inform citizens on the effective tax rate, which is now dubbed the no new revenue rate, which I think is even more confusing. We should have just kept the terminology the same, because you get some weird, funky stuff every once in a while with the effective versus the no new revenue rate. But effectively what that is the effective tax rate is the rate at which you tax that you collect the same amount of revenue minus new growth. Right. That makes sense. I could really dive down into the weeds with that, but I really don't.
Don't do that, because I don't want to lose viewers.
We'll lose way too many people.
Yeah, no. I need to reintroduce you, Zach. Zach, this is Zach Maxwell, Chief of Staff with State Representative Lang up in North Texas, over in the DFW area. He is with us to discuss any and all questions about the Texas Legislature, and if you have any questions about bills that are coming up, feel free. There are plenty of topics we're going to cover: marijuana, gambling, things like that. So feel free to comment. This is interactive. Please feel free. I really want Zach to get a feel about what you all seem to think. Those of you that watch our show regularly. Bert is asking the question: why have Republicans lost all major cities to Democrats in Texas? Ooh, that's a tough one. We can be here all night for that one question. Zach?
Yes. So I think one of the big reasons is a lot of folks actually moving from, fleeing, from these blue states. Well, they're fleeing into the big cities. And so I think that's one major reason why a lot of these major cities are turning towards the Democrats. And also, it's just a different culture. Having grown up in the rural areas and lived in, various big cities, whether temporarily or a long-term situation, I can just tell you the overall culture is just a little bit different. In big cities, there's a lot more to do. You see a lot more extracurricular activities that are out there. And people are a little bit more, I guess, less apt to pay attention to what's going on, in their community. Whereas in the rural areas, there's not as much to do. There's still a lot to do, but there's not as much to pay attention to. And so it's a little bit easier to let that information seep in to see what actually, people are doing. They'll go to city council meetings and, their city councilmen's their drinking buddies. So, they're going to keep up with what's going on within the community. Whereas in a big city, you just don't have that type of relationship going on. So I think, by and large, those two factors are probably the biggest reasons why the Democrats are seeping in a little bit more in the big cities.
I wanted to follow up on. Oh, there you go. With Mari's question about charter schools. Do you think, and the public education was the big topic. And my follow-up to that question will be, what is the big topic or the big issue going to be in this legislature, like property taxes and education was last legislative session? The fact that the I guess we're going to have a Biden administration. That's still in the courts, but let's not have that discussion, because then YouTube's going to get all mad at us and ban us, because we're some of us might question whether or not that's going to happen. But let's say, for sake of argument, Biden's going to have an administration. He's going to have a wacky liberal Secretary of Education. Will that put a hamper on the growth of charter schools? Because here in the Valley, we're the big charter school is IDEA. They're popping up everywhere. They've had a very cozy relationship, not only with state Republicans, but they're having a cozy relationship with the Trump administration the last 4 years that has allowed them to grow even more, and competing with school boards and school districts, public school districts like Brownsville ISD, which is the largest employer south of San Antonio. So what do you think about the relationship that might happen in Texas?
Yeah, and something else I'd like to bring up also is that, even among conservatives, sometimes we have a little bit of a disconnect as to what charter schools do. They are public schools. They're just privately run, right? And so there is a big confusion. And also there's a big, especially out here in the rural areas, I think there's been some disinformation going on about, who runs, charter schools. And, there's a big, talk about how, they're all Muslim run, from a bunch of people that, want to indoctrinate our kids, that, that we shouldn't be using tax dollars to fund that. And so so you actually see from the charter school perspective, it's really hard and school choice is added into that as well. In regards to parental rights to choose where their kids, have the money follow the kid. You have headbutting from both sides. But as far as a Biden administration and the relationship that you would have with the states, it's going to be really interesting to watch to see how much pushback. You're going to see a pendulum swing in Texas. Obviously, anything that Biden decides that he wants to do, it's going to be the popular thing for the Republicans to swing the opposite direction. And so we actually might see a big push for more charter schools this election cycle, despite all the pushback that we've gotten from, public school lobbies and associations. You never really can tell. It's just one of those things to where every session is different. And it really kind of depends on what the hot topic is. I don't know if schools are going to be another hot topic, and it might be one of those low key things. And if it is a low key thing, that might be one of the things where we may be able to slide in a few solid reforms for charter schools, kind of under the radar whenever, we're all focused on something else.
So what do you think is going to be the big theme of this upcoming legislature? In your opinion?
Honestly, that is anybody's guess, really, because this session is going to be so different. As it stands right now, it's my understanding that they're not going to allow anybody but members and staff within the building. And so, I don't know what that's going to look like, because typically you have lobbyists kind of pushing one direction. You're not going to have that. You have citizen groups pushing another direction. You're not going to have that. So it really is going to be interesting to watch, to see those dynamics and how it's going to work out. But I know that you had mentioned gambling. I know that there's going to be a big push for that this session.
Yeah, that's going to be the next topic.
Yeah, and we can wait for that.
Yeah.
I think a big push is going to be, if it can gain traction, that is going to obviously be this constitutional question that we have in play in regards to what happened with the shutdowns and Governor Abbott, pushing down a whole bunch of orders, in my opinion, unconstitutionally. Whether you agree with them or don't agree with them, it was unconstitutional. He didn't have the right to do that. And
unconstitutional with regards to the state constitution, for everybody that's clear. Yeah, the state and I agree with you on that. Absolutely. It was unconstitutional when it comes to the state.
And there's separation of powers that is actually in the Constitution that explicitly states that that all rights reserved for the legislature cannot be delegated to any other branch. And that was one of those things to where you're taking the legislature passed a bill that delegated powers they were not able to delegate, and then Governor Abbott further expanded on those by changing law and doing a bunch of other things. And as you know, with the shutdowns, as we can see, which in my opinion, completely unconstitutional.
We'll go again. If you want to put the next comment, Cruz, that's fine. We are with Zach Maxwell, Chief of Staff with State Representative Lang. Feel free to ask any of your questions. Encourage sharing this feed. It would be a great thing, so that we can become informed as we prepare for the state legislature that's going to start in less than a month. And so you have people moving in Austin already. I know that some of my friends who are in the legislature, they're moving in, getting ready to go. They don't even really spend Christmas with their families because they're getting ready for the big push for the legislature. Doc Juan Carlos Vega is asking, does AG Ken Paxton have any chance of winning an election fraud lawsuit? Okay, Doc, don't want to really talk a lot about the election because, in case you didn't know, YouTube in its infinite wisdom, and we do stream on YouTube, has said we will delete videos if you talk about the election, and censoring essentially speech of people, even us, who we're trying to have a discussion, an intellectual discussion, an academic discussion, a political question on things. And if that topic comes up, we might get deleted. As it was, I put an innocuous press release from our U.S. Senator Ted Cruz on our Facebook page, and Facebook said, if you really want to know about the election, you go to us. It's like, it's dumb. And so, not that I don't want to ask the question, but I want to be very careful as to how Zach answers the question so that we don't get deleted. Okay? All right. So please, if you're able to answer the question that way, I would appreciate it.
I think with anything like that, it's going to be one of those. It is a long shot. Whether or not so the Supreme Court has a couple of options. Let me put it this way. So they could rule on it, and they could rule in favor of it, but it may not be retroactive, as in it may not apply to this election cycle. It may be proactive, as in future elections. They cannot do those sort of systems that were ripe with potential activities.
Yeah, I like that phrase. That works.
Potential alleged activities that may or may not have happened. And so, that is pretty much, I'll leave it there. It is absolutely possible, and it is definitely unheard of, except for a few times maybe during our founding, where all these states have joined together to do this. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court will have that decision.
Yeah, Robert is saying more and more liberals moving from California, which would be problematic.
And I will tell you on that quote, or that note real quick, there are actually, here in Granbury specifically, and my wife's a realtor, she meets people from California, New York, Oregon, that are moving to Texas and moving to Granbury specifically all the time, and they are conservative. So I think there is a really good mix, and I think that it ultimately kind of evens out with so many people moving in. I think obviously the mass of the liberal population is moving more towards the big cities, whereas you've got a lot of other folks that are, they're also moving to big cities that are conservative. But a lot of them are moving to the rural areas or the suburbs around the metropolitan areas that are very, very conservative. One of them told my wife the other day of like, oh, I'm just so glad that I can, share my faith here without getting scalded. And, it's kind of sad, but that's kind of, you could really consider them refugees from some of these states.
Yeah. Robert is adding, at the same time, you have smaller counties growing in the Republican numbers. For example, this election, 40% of voters voted Republican. And that happened in Hidalgo County, a little bit more than 40%, right? Cruz, right, Madi? And for like Trump in Cameron County got 45% of the vote, which is not unheard of for a Republican to do so well. Governor Bush, well, when he was governor, I can't remember, it was 2004. Bush won Cameron County. It was red that year. It's not going to happen. Roman, okay. The gambling yesterday, the evening time traveler. Yesterday, the Texas Tribune came out with a story about Sheldon Anderson, and is going to talk about he's pushing gambling and gambling casinos. What has been the roadblock so far in the legislature while you've been there to this? And Can Sheldon Anderson make this happen?
Oh.
Yes. That gambling is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, and at least in the past, the legislature has just been completely unwilling to even touch that subject. I personally will tell you that I am not pro legalizing gambling in the state of Texas, and there's a few. I have logical reasons, and then I have like social reasons. But from the policy, just the pure public policy side of things, I previously just talked about the education lobby being among the heavy hitters, if not the single most influential and strongest lobby in the state of Texas. Wait till the gambling lobby hits the state of Texas. We've heard, from colleagues in other states that have legalized gambling, that they're just overrun because that injecting that kind of money in that way, in that industry into the state of Texas. Typically ripe with fraud and organized crime and other things, and those terms can be debated all day long, whether that's true or not. But that it would be a very, very big lobby if that were to ever actually take place. And then the other side, the social aspect of it, is that we would have from a social conservative side, I guess, is just the idea that we have a lot of our indigent that will go and that will participate in if it's so readily available here in the States. They would go and they would gamble a lot, and then a lot of these folks, the demographics, typically on public assistance and things, and then they would stay on public assistance because obviously they would be spending all their money in gambling. I'm not. That's not really the main reason why, because I typically lean more, the right to choose and the freedom aspect and the free market aspect of that. I'm also not as big when the public incentives on that either. So, but it's one of those things that it's very difficult, and for abundance of, but those being the main two reasons why you really won't see conservatives being behind legalized gambling in the next few sessions, in my opinion. But it may be one of those things where it gets some traction this session, and we may see that. I suspect that they'd probably want to try to make it a constitutional amendment, to make it to where it's enshrined in the Constitution, and that would be a public vote, and I actually think the citizens of Texas would probably overwhelmingly support legalized gambling in the state of Texas from the economic standpoint. But who's to say?
Marty?
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can read the comment and add and ask your question.
Oh, okay. I was like,
yeah.
The theory is that the Republican Party has lost its touch with free-thinking population. The party has been more of the argumental and left its base behind when they abandoned the conservative compassion. You know what? The whole time that I've been in the legislature, gambling was just something that was not going to happen. So I think it's a lot of factors that are played into that. It's not a very simple topic that we can really talk about and dissect. It's more complex than what we think about. So it'd be interesting to see. I know that last session, 1 second, hold on.
It's okay. No worries. It's okay. I'll continue on the thought. Robert is saying we don't need more charter schools. When Marty comes back, she can ask your question. It seems we asked this question on our page, and it seems the people that commented, obviously it's not like a representative sample of everybody, but they seem to be in support of gambling. People go play bingo quite often. They play the lotto. But it could simply be that we have a lower level of income and people just want to gamble and become rich and potentially see that thing. I have a good friend of mine, Pastor Brad Burks, who I believe is a precinct chair within the Republican Party here in Cameron County, who's a pastor and has spoken passionately against the idea of legalized gambling, especially casinos, because he's seen the badness of it in the Midwest. I think it was in Nebraska where he had seen where they have I don't know if it's Nebraska or Missouri where he's seen it. So as a social conservative, I can see why some of them might be against it. Mari, you can comment now that you're okay.
Just to my knowledge, it's not easy. It's not a conversation. Oh, let's do scratch. It's one thing is using the lottery tickets that you go and you buy at the store, versus what they're trying to do here in Texas. And you can't just talk about it like you would education. It's very, very complex. It's a lot of factors, a lot of stakeholders. But I know that from the time that I've been in the legislature, it's always a not going to happen, not going to happen, not going to happen. I've been there since 2003. But this year, this time around, it's more of a, possibility. It's not going to happen indefinitely. But there's possibly some wiggle room depending on how the lobby moves forward in addressing it this upcoming session. So it might not be like 100% throughout Texas, but it'll be there may be something. But that goes with that question right now. Like, do the Indian reservation casinos like Kickapoo concerned about bringing more gambling to Texas? Of course they are. They are one of the biggest stakeholders in gambling in Texas. And so and they are very important as to how gambling will move in Texas. So it's not something that we can just say, oh, it will happen, regardless of whether you and I want it or we don't want it. It's how is it going to be maneuvered through everything that has to go through in a legislative session.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that there's been a big influx this year of money being put into. I think they kind of see this as their opportunity to be able to get in, because, like I said, it's going to be it's going to be a different session, and I think that lobbyists have done a good job at getting to the legislators prior to all of the shutdowns and everything, and getting that conversation started. Having money flow in the right directions, and they're not going to have citizens in their ear. They're not going to have other lobbyists in their ear. They're going to be pretty much left to their own volition to do whatever they want in this legislative session, because there's not going to be anybody else in the Capitol. And so I think it's going to be an interesting session in that regard.
Yeah. Let's go to some
plenty of anecdotal evidence that people that don't have money, that after they win, they just blow it. As a matter of fact, Roman, do you remember in Brownsville, the $10 million lotto winner went out and bought $10 million worth of cocaine and started to go crazy selling to everybody or giving it to everybody. And he got arrested and he lost everything. And whatever money was left over, the state came in and took it. So
that's one way to recoup your money for the state.
This was like around the 80s, I think it was, right after the lotto came online.
Yeah, because it started in, if I'm not mistaken, under Ann Richards' administration, right? Like 1990, 1989. So it's been around for a while. Let's go through some of these comments, because I think we're really behind on comments. So we're going. So again, state constitution similar to PA Supreme Court changing mail-in voting. We can say that maybe. We'll go there. Eddie's a great attorney in Houston, so if you need Eddie and you get arrested in Houston, go see Eddie de los Santos. I don't want to debate against Doc as well. Neither do I. I don't feel like debating Doc either right now. Lorenzo Benavides is saying, maybe one of you can answer a question I have. Who or what law is there that all business in downtown Brownsville do not have to let you use the restrooms? I, as an elderly, will not go downtown. I was told I could not use their restrooms. Even went to a bakery and they told me no. I'm from Chicago and they have a law that you have to let elderly people use their restrooms or they will be fined. How does one go about starting, or who to talk to about a petition for here in Brownsville, Texas? And I think there's more comments, but only so many can actually show up on the StreamYard. So if you want to add that in, that'd be great. I would recommend contacting our mayor and seeing that we can talk to him. If you want to message the page, and I'll try to get that message to our mayor. The mayor, I'm not going to get you any special treatment just because he's my attorney. But I think that's a good point. Maybe they can, maybe look into that. But I don't know. Maybe, Zach, there's a state law against.
If it's a private business, they have the right to refuse service. Now, if it was a public a public park that the restrooms weren't being open or available, then you would have, an issue there, something that could be remedied. But I don't see how you can force a private business to do something that they don't want to.
And Chicago is a little bit different. They're more of a Democrat-run area, but then again, we are a Democrat blue area here in Brownsville, so every single one of our city commissioners are very, very liberal Democrats. So, Zach.
And I was going to say, it's one of those things where if that was something that you wanted to seek, that would theoretically be probably some sort of an ordinance at the local level if they wanted to do that. But I would agree, you stand some sort. If somebody really wanted to complain, it'd be one of those things where you could start a movement of like, hey, let's be nice to our elderly or something. But you would probably stand a good chance of getting sued if you pass some sort of ordinance like that, forcing a private business to allow public access to something like a restroom. I don't know the laws on that, so you got me.
I mean, we have mayors shutting down a lot of businesses and small businesses as it is, and not as much pushback. You get more pushback in more Republican areas. I'm unfortunately not seeing a lot of pushback from every small business owner. Even though they're hurting, maybe they're doing it on the down low because they don't want any trouble, and that's unfortunate. That's why I personally try to support small business as much as I possibly can. For dinner, I had New York Deli, #2 here in Brownsville. I had the #7 hot. I support small business whenever I can. New York Deli, very conservative restaurant. So if you would like lunch tomorrow is their fish po' boy and shrimp. And no, I'm not getting paid or being asked to advertise for them. I just feel the need to support people that are good to me. Not that they give me a discount or anything. Robert, that was going to be our next topic after gambling is going to be marijuana. Where does Texas stand on legalizing marijuana? But if it's okay, Robert, can we go through some of these comments and then we'll go back as soon as we're done with comments? Because we're really behind. We'll talk about that. Oh, Doc wants to ask the question too. With the further decriminalization of marijuana at the federal level, would conservative Texas change its laws, therefore bringing in millions in tax revenue? Might as well talk about it now. All right. Marijuana. Where do we stand on marijuana? I know our state representative for Brownsville, part of Brownsville anyway, Eddie Lucia III, and his chief of staff is a good friend of mine, Ruben Obel, are big supporters of decriminalizing marijuana. Where do we stand on this issue for this upcoming legislative session?
Sure. So again, it's going to be one of those gotchas of like, your guess is as good as mine with this legislative session, just because of the nature of the legislative session. I think it is highly unlikely that we have any sort of decrim in regards to the legalization of marijuana. It's one of those topics that still out in the rural areas is a very big no-no. Most conservative areas, especially if my rep would even muttered the word decrim in our district, he'd get lynched on the street. So it really is still that big of a topic of anti-marijuana in most of the state. In some areas, obviously maybe down there or in some of the bigger cities, even in Austin, they've passed local ordinances to not arrest for certain amounts of marijuana. I've been to music festivals, they're out there smoking it right in front of you, and there's police officers walking by and they're not saying a thing. And so that's one of those weird subjects that local communities are going to do what they're going to do, and at the state level, I just don't see it this session. But I could be wrong. My boss, though, has been very involved, and we've been very involved with the expansion of the Compassionate Use Act, which relates to CBD with low levels of THC in it to help with cancer patients, and then also youth that have terminal illnesses and long-term illnesses that affect your situational awareness, like autism and other things. So
would medical marijuana be more of a possibility because we've already done the CBD and it seems to be supportive? I see a lot of libertarians that are Republicans supportive of CBD oil popping up everywhere. I've used it once and it didn't do it for me, but doesn't mean it won't do it for other people and benefit them because I have muscular dystrophy. It didn't really help me. Is this a possibility? Is this even something that in the rural communities, in the rural counties that make up a good chunk of the state legislature, that's not going to happen at all. Not even medical marijuana.
And so, unfortunately, the education on some of that stuff, I think a lot of people, if they understood, would likely support, because I mean, even medical marijuana, I mean, it would be highly regulated. You know, it wouldn't be, I suspect that if we did have something like that in Texas, it wouldn't be one of those things like in California where they just write you, oh, you got glaucoma, okay, here you go, you know, go have fun. So it would actually be for, you know, serious instances where it could actually help. But because of some of those libertarians that you're referring to that are very public about, you know, wanting to completely decriminalize marijuana, that has kind of ruined it for any chance at any sort of serious medical marijuana legalization, because they're, oh, it's just a stepping stone. We're just going to, you know, that's how they get you. It's a slippery slope. And so that's just one of those things.
Robert is saying, I expect Texas will support casinos in a new future. All right. It will be voted down. Okay, that's would make economic sense, wouldn't it? I'm assuming she's talking about casinos still.
I think
For
so.
them.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm late. We were celebrating my grandbaby birthday. Good evening, everyone. I promised to watch the full show later on tonight. My apology. No worry, Claudia. I appreciate you being here. I just shared the feed. I appreciate it. Thanks. Next, with President-elect Biden's comment during the debates alienate the oil industry when he wants to bring in more green energy. Shouldn't Texas start looking into the future? Wind farms and solar are sprouting out throughout the state. Is this not good for Texas? Your thoughts on?
Yeah, I absolutely think that that's not good for Texas. Any sort of Democrat that wants to affect our oil and gas industry is not going to be very popular here, seeing as it is a cornerstone of you know, our economic independence and superiority. So, do I think that we should be looking into other forms of, you know, renewable energy and stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're looking, you know, especially when it comes to water here. I mean, my boss sat on natural resources. Thank you. It's been a day for me as well. My boss sat on natural resources, and so I mean, some of those things, you know, with water and other natural resources, you know, of course, absolutely. Should we be subsidizing them heavily with state, you know, and federal tax dollars? Probably not. I don't think that that's equitable for everybody. You see that in the wind farms. Sometimes this is a very unpopular opinion, but you know, I'm all about wind farms whenever it's not publicly subsidized. But then wind farms don't want to do them unless it's publicly subsidized. You know, with 313s or whatever, what have you. And so it's one of those things. Absolutely, I think that we should be doing it, but I think that it should be driven by industry and it should be driven in the public sector, not in the government sector.
Yeah. Again, we're with. I'm going to reintroduce Zach again. Sorry, I need to do this every few minutes because some people come in and they leave and things like that. That's kind of like radio. We have with us Zach Maxwell. He's the chief of staff with State Representative Lang over in North Texas. If you have any questions for Zach, please feel free to post them. We will try to get to them in the next 40 minutes because we usually go to about 9. We may go cut it early depending on how long Zach wants to keep talking. So anyway, so feel free to ask your question, Cruz.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that he's absolutely correct that we subsidize the wind farms or each windmill. Otherwise, they would not be doing it. And we're talking, this is state. Of course, the federal has their own write-off schedule or very generous write-off schedule. Not only that, again, this is a state legislature issue. They passed the law that forced the utilities to pay almost retail for the energy that the wind farms generate. And in some cases, I don't know about Texas, but in some states, when the wind does not blow, the utilities still have to pay the wind farms. So there's a lot of just crappy legislation to, I don't know, get some sort of corruption, in my opinion. To not really say anything further, it's just pure corruption going on.
Yeah, and I don't think we have that problem as much in Texas with the wind not blowing. So I don't think that we've actually hit that, especially out in West Texas where it's always windy. It's not a windy day if it's blowing 10 miles an hour. So that's one of those things that I don't think we've quite gotten to that point. And I don't know what the policy is on whether or not the wind farms would have to actually still be paid by the utilities if the wind wasn't blowing. But I do know that the wind turbine lobby is very strong in the state of Texas, and of course their big fight now is 313s, and that is a local subsidy. That is a tax abatement that conservatives have for a long time tried to fight to end tax abatements altogether. But one big thing that they've been trying to at least carve out is wind turbines being able to use tax abatements to fund their projects. And because a lot of times they'll get long-term, 10, 15-year tax abatements, and then they'd leave.
Oh, Eddie's saying don't do criminal laws, so don't come see me. But I can make a referral. Okay, it's okay. Yeah, there's no money in criminal law. That's what you're trying to tell me, right, Eddie? Good conservative, make money. No restroom use. No wonder our downtown alleys smell like. Okay, I'm not gonna say that word, but yeah, okay. Next comment. I went to the mayor, no answer. Really? Well, they forced business to shut down in Texas. That is very true. They did.
And I'll tell you, out here, it's kind of a running joke. And even the locals, our city actually said that they weren't going to be enforcing some of that stuff because it's unenforceable. But the county is taking a little bit different approach. And they just yesterday moved everybody back down to 50%. And, in all the businesses, you have these big signs that say masks required and, only 50%, but it's packed in there and ain't nobody wearing a mask. So people down here, up here from
Okay, yeah.
We have I don't know what it's like down there, but it's the biggest running joke in the history of Texas, in my opinion, with all these shutdowns and everything, because everybody's just tired of it. They're just like, okay, we played along for a little while. Now we know what this virus is and what it's actually doing. And, we don't really care.
Yeah. Go at best needs when he's 10 foot tall. Okay. Are you going to address mail ballots and election security? We see that's something I think we can talk about with the legislature. Is this something that might be looked at into this upcoming legislature to make election security a thing?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because I do think that is going to be a very big topic. I would be shocked if this was not a massive topic this legislative session in regards to election integrity. Mm-hmm. In fact, I and my boss fought really hard for some election integrity legislation this past legislative session, but unfortunately, with the governor's office and the AG's office and the Secretary of State and DPS, all these different agencies, that were kind of breathing down our neck, wanting to make sure that we did it correctly. We had a really good piece of legislation specifically that would tie into our voter ID law, which would actually require citizenship to vote. And so that's one of those things that I think everyone can appreciate is that, the one thing that gives us the right to vote, which is our citizenship, that you probably think that'd be one of the only things that you'd check to see if you're an actual citizen of the state of Texas to be able to vote in the state of Texas. And so, that's one thing. So, but the thing that actually killed that piece of legislation is that we don't have a database in the state of Texas that can operate that type of task. So I'll just leave that one out there.
There's so many holes all along the election chain of things that need to happen that I don't know whether it's purposeful. Because there's the whole thing just gaping wide as to what can happen that circumvents integrity. It makes me wonder whether it was something done on purpose or not.
Yeah, and in regards to mail-in balloting, especially here in the state of Texas, I mean, there were several lawsuits, right? The Houston decided that they were going to, bombard and send a whole bunch of mail-in ballots to people who did not even apply for mail-in ballots. They just blanket it with a whole bunch of mail-in ballots. And one thing that's important to understand when it comes to elections, and that's really my bread and butter is elections, is that, the lists are just it's so hard. I do commend the elections administrators for at least trying, the ones that are actually trying and that aren't being lazy, because there are those out there, I can assure you. But it's so hard to keep those lists clean because you've got people moving constantly. You've got people, so they're different addresses. You've got people dying. You've got people that are becoming felons and they can't vote. You've got so many people moving in. And so to actually keep those lists clean enough to be able to blanket every registered voter with a mail-in ballot, you are asking for fraud. I mean, you're just asking for it. And across the country, we saw people that would go in and they would try to vote. It's like, oh, well, you sent in a mail-in ballot. You've already voted. And it's like, no, I didn't. I did not request that. And I did not vote via mail-in. And so you're just gonna ask for fraud and just a lot of confusion, and it's very difficult. But we should obviously have that.
Next,
one of the weakest links is the motor voter registration. If you have a corrupt clerk or you have a lazy clerk, all they have to do is click the little box for voter registration. I personally know of 3 people that received their registration and they went to go get their driver's license and their residence. They were not asked. They were not asked if they wanted to vote or register to vote. They just were registered by the clerk.
Next comment, please. Texas is one of the biggest oil industries in the country. It will never happen. It will hurt thousands of jobs here in Texas. There was a previous question, I think, about Doc. We didn't answer that question about, as an educator, this pandemic has proven the STAR test is not necessary. Will legislation ever remove this stressful test?
So that was yeah. So it's difficult, and that was another, because this was a very big public education session. There were a lot of bills that completely took away STAR testing, that significantly reduced STAR testing. They did reduce STAR testing down to the minimum number of tests. And the deal with the STAR test that, I have contention with is, there's pretty much a monopoly on it. And it doesn't need to be so high stressed. There should be, because we have to have accountability. Everybody agrees that we have to have accountability. We have to be able to measure, where our students are and how they're learning. Nobody argues with that. Nobody questions that. Is the STAR test the correct way to do that? I don't think so. Is there a version of that might be able to come forward? Possibly. But that's, again, one of those things that the Texas lobby, the education lobby, especially all those folks like TASA, TASB, and all those taxpayer-funded organizations, they're more for it than you think they are. Educators out there, they fight pretty hard behind the scenes to make sure that nothing changes in that realm, because they also get a lot of kickbacks from some of that stuff. And they also want to keep teachers sufficiently upset to fund their endeavors. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting way that, some of that works. But of course, I'd be called a conspiracy theorist. But hey, listen, I was in there. I saw it. It's not secret.
I mean, you're there. You know what you're talking about.
I've been there too. So yeah, I agree with you.
So Doc and all of you members of AOBE and BEST and the other one, TSTA, all you guys, you all like, we hate the STAR test. Why do we have to do it? It's because the very, very same people that you all support really support it.
And if I can interview you one more time, my boss actually filed a bill. If any of you got an email, any educators out there got an email talking about unfunded mandates on the school districts. Well, my boss had a bill to actually make every single unfunded mandate within the Texas Association of School Boards big book of unfunded mandates that they disclaimed as unfunded mandates. Some of them are kind of silly, but he made a bill to make all of them optional. And we sat down with all of our administrators, or most of our administrators, the ones that wanted to be active in the process, and asked them, like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about it? Oh, it's great, great. And then the associations kind of came down, and they were like, well, maybe they shouldn't be optional. Maybe you could just get rid of them, or you could just give us the money. We'd take that. We would rather you just completely fund all this, because a lot of these things, we think that they're good. We just don't want to pay for them.
Yeah.
So interesting how that is. It's not that you don't like the state mandating things. It's just you just want more money for it. And so we found out with that bill that went nowhere. The Public Education Committee chairman in the House, Dan Huberty, actually liked the bill and was going to push it through. But again, I think the lobby got to him and realized that if that were to go into effect, their lobbying ability would actually be hurt, because there would be nothing for them to cling to say, we need more money. So it'd be really difficult.
Yeah. So, corruption star, are you talking about Brownsville, Texas? LOL. Next comment. Simple. Know when we can count on most of our officials. They are full of hot air. You can feel it during the campaign's election days. I don't disagree with you, Richard, on that one. Of course, they are not our officials, our altar boys and girls like Minerva Peña. Minerva is the previous past board president of BISD. Finally, I agree with Doc. Texas needs to remove the STAR test. And y'all need to get a pack going and tell TASB to support that. Should at least have to use voter ID for mail. I agree. Next, they want to hold kids accountable, but don't want to hold districts accountable by giving grades this year. I have a feeling they did that because they don't want to spend the time and effort doing it, but districts have time and effort to make kids take the test. Don't even get me started. Elizabeth is a novice, a rookie trustee in Kingsville ISD in Clay County. And by the way, Brandon Bear is the former Republican county chairman in Clay County. So, you know, Zach, that way Zach can maybe remember some of y'all when he comes back on. Next comment. TA is still working from home, right?
Yeah, let me tell you, I had, even with my boss retiring, we were trying to work on some bills with some other offices. And even while the shutdowns and all this other kind of stuff was going, the mask mandates, you know, I tried very hard to get a hold of folks in the TEA as well as other offices. And it is you have to leave a voicemail and then they will call you back, because they don't answer the phones. They won't answer the phones. And I'm sure they're still working from home. And in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think that they see it as more of just a big long vacation than, you know, oh, I'm scared that I'm going to die from a virus that has a survival rate of 90%. But,
right.
Yeah.
Will Texas ever create a super train railway to connect the major cities, or just keep our rusty pickup trucks we love so much?
They're going to keep them trucks, man.
All right. Next comment so we can catch up. Is that it? Have we caught up? Oh, good. All right. Because there's some topics we haven't touched on. One of them is something that I think is near and dear to Zach's heart, is ethics under the dome, ethics, and what happens when you become part of the machine, I guess you could say, in the legislature. You come in as I guess is happy, ready to make a difference, and you come in almost dejected. And since you're leaving the legislature, maybe you can write a tell-all book on that or something. What are your thoughts on that, Zach?
I bet me and Marty both could probably come up with a few chapters for a said book. It's interesting, you know, and it's not what a lot of people think. I think it's actually more of a spiritual warfare than it is anything, especially, you know, for the Christians out there. And there's a lot of Christians that go into the legislature it's just a different place. And when it comes to ethics and, you know, being that, you know, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed legislator, or being that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to rock and roll staffer that's worked campaigns and has gone out and knocked thousands of doors and is ready to fight for the state of Texas, like myself, there's a shocking realization as to the apathy that is within the dome. A lot of the staffers are, quite frankly, lazy. Sorry, colleagues out there, but a lot of you are. You know who I'm talking about. It's most of you. They don't really want to. They see taking calls from constituents as a waste of time. They don't focus on letters that come in or some of those things. Some of the hot topics that are driven in the campaign trail. They'll go and they'll make big statements about it, and they'll maybe file a bill, but then they'll go talk to the committee chairman and they'll say, hey, I don't really want this to move. Can you just slide that into the back? And then maybe you could do me a favor and get it out, right before the deadline or right after the deadline before it won't make calendars and won't pass over in the Senate. But as far as, from a Christian's perspective, and that's really where I'd like to come at this from, is that even among the they have an organization down there called the Capitol Commission, and that's really kind of like the chaplaincy of the Texas legislature. A lot of really nice guys that go down there and that work as chaplains and stuff, but it's really I think that the culture has really driven it to where it's more of a social club. And unfortunately, a lot of those guys end up being lobbyists after a couple of years, and they're utilizing all of the personal relationships that they had built using God to then, fight for legislation for money. And so I think that is a huge disconnect. And I've got some special words for those type of people that I won't share on here. But I don't think that's right. And I think that that's part of the problem is that, Christians aren't holding each other accountable. We're not, working together as efficiently as maybe we should. It's just really difficult, especially among staffers. And, because you'll go down there and if you don't have any sort of like accountability buddy, I mean, it's so easy. Like, and I got trapped in it there for a little while and got a little scared and was like, wow, am I going to go down a path I don't want to go down? I've never been to any of the parties where there's, strippers and all this and stuff, but they definitely happen. I've been offered cocaine. I've been offered other types of drugs, copious amounts of alcohol. It's one of those things where that is a culture down there, and you can very easily get trapped in it. Not everybody down there does that kind of stuff, but there definitely are circles that is very easily for you just to walk into, and you don't know you're getting into it, and then next thing you know, you're lost.
Yeah.
So
that's very telling. Hopefully, this doesn't happen. This legislative session, considering it's just going to be the members and their staff in a lowly big building. The other question that we were going to Cruz wanted to talk about had to do with lobbying and municipalities and public entities. What was sort of your question, Cruz, on that?
It's actually a two-part question. I never did really follow up. Did they ever pass any kind of legislation against including lobbying costs for utilities like AT&T, PUB, etc.? And do you think that they'll pass any kind of legislation for cities this go around to not include lobbying costs as part of an expense line, if you will?
on like a bill, on like a telephone bill?
Right. Well, again, at one time, the utilities, again, would use the expense of lobbying to be included in expenses to show, hey, look at all our costs, when 10% of those costs were lobbying costs. Did they ever outlaw that? And do you think that they will outlaw that for city and county governments that are doing the same?
So I think what you're talking about is more taxpayer-funded lobbying. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So last session we actually had a bill, and it was so close, but there was a few of our illustrious colleagues that kind of messed it up for everyone in that session. But we came very close to having a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying, but a bill did pass making it more of a transparency issue. And so you can actually go and you can request, from your municipalities, because they are supposed to disclose, how much they have spent on lobbying activities, as well as, any big public events. I think somewhere down there in the in the Valley, there was a big city that had brought in some big stars, for these
McAllen.
McAllen, right?
Yep. And so there was the author of that bill, Mays Middleton, who's now the Freedom Caucus chairman. He authored that bill. That's his big champion issue, and he has been kind of in a fight with McAllen trying to get all that information. I think he did ultimately end up getting that information. It was made pretty public of how much they spent and all that. But there were several lawsuits about it. But that is going to be another big issue. Whether or not it gets traction this session, I don't know. I hope so, because I think that is I think that's an atrocity, in my opinion, that they spend so much money. Again, that's one of the reasons why the education lobby is so strong, is because a lot of taxpayer dollars go to fund those types of activities, and they are not pro-taxpayer, I'll tell you that. And so we're paying for it. And then from the city level, the big argument, the city and school district level, is the big argument is like, well, what are you saying? Then I wouldn't be able to drive down to the legislature to talk to you. It's like, well, that's not true, because that's not lobbying. That's doing your job. You can absolutely, we have 40 in our district. We have 8 counties. We have 40 school districts. That means 40 school boards, 40 superintendents, and countless cities. And of course, 8 commissioners' courts, tons of special public districts. So we had no problem whatsoever fielding all the questions, comments, concerns from all of our city, county, and other municipal type governments. And if we can do that with a staff of 4 during a legislative session, and then in addition to the representative, I don't think we're going to have a problem. And it was really a lot of those associations confusing those members, because they would call and they'd say, hey, you don't need to be doing that. And it's like, well, what are you talking about? And then we'd explain it. Oh, never mind. No, please continue what you're doing. These associations are confusing these guys, and they think that they're being there as a help. So do I think that it will become outlaw? Probably not this session, unfortunately, because again, but who knows? It might be one of those things to where they don't have the lobbyists in their ears, and they might be able to slide it through. Because I definitely think something like that. I do think that Dade Phelan, the new speaker, presumptive speaker, I think that's something that he's not going to put his thumb on. I think he's going to let the legislative process work as it should, and then it'll go over to the Senate. And I think that it definitely would pass the Senate, given the opportunity.
Yeah. So the chairman over here is asking a question. Bill drug testing legislators.
Yeah.
One.
Do what?
I think wasn't there one already?
No, well, they're not. So they're not drug tested. I'm definitely in favor of that, because even as you saw, Pancho Navarez, that was a big story. The guy literally had like several ounces of cocaine in an envelope that was a taxpayer envelope that with his office seal on it, that he dropped at a TxDOT airport and was found, and then was put under investigation. Which, by the way, he's still the chairman of Homeland Security and Public Safety.
Thank you, Speaker Bonin. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that.
You're so great. You're the best speaker we've ever had, ever.
All those interim hearings about public safety and drugs and other things, obviously did not happen. So.
Oh, well, what a shock. Yay. Thanks.
Yeah, surprise.
Speaker Bonin. What other topics were there that we had wanted to touch on? Because let me look at it, because I don't remember what they were right now. The next speaker. Okay. For those of us who don't know, I this is a very hodgepodgey sort of an introduction to Zach, because hopefully we'll have Zach on, regularly throughout the legislative session. Even though he's not going to be there, I know he's going to know stuff. How does a bill happen, and how can we support it? Especially like if you're a teacher and you want to support more funding for them or bonuses for them because they feel that they're not getting the amount of bonuses they deserve during the pandemic or whatever. How can somebody, how does a bill happen, and how long does it take to happen? Potentially, does it have to take several legislative sessions, for something to get passed?
Yeah. So typically, it depends on how much public support is behind a piece of legislation, or how motivated and determined a legislator is about that singular piece of legislation. It depends on how fast it goes and how much opposition there is, how much confusion there is. I mean, obviously, the cleaner the bill, the quicker it'll go through the process. And what I mean by clean is, I mean, you've already talked to decision makers, you've already talked to industry leaders, you've already talked, and cleaned up and had all the questions answered and all of that. And then all the opposition, all of their opposition questions have been answered, sufficiently. And, there isn't any sort of confusion about the legislation, and it's all clearly, explained and expressed within the committee process. But how you can help with that, easy as picking up the phone and giving a call. I will tell you that an email is also effective, but the most effective way that you can get a legislator to pay attention to you is a handwritten or a typed. It can definitely be typed, especially if you don't have that great of, if you have like illegible handwriting, like myself, I'd recommend typed, and then wet signed, a letter to your legislator. That will go light years ahead of the pack, and that will actually make your legislator pay attention to it, because we actually don't get many of those. We get a lot of phone calls, we get a lot of emails, but when we get a handwritten letter from a constituent, and if we get a couple handwritten letters from constituents, people start talking and people start noticing, wow, okay, why is this an issue? Somebody do some research on what this issue is and why our constituents care about it. And somebody track down their phone number and give them a call, so we can talk to them about that. And so, but again, that depends on your state rep, because there's a lot of state reps and state senators that frankly just don't give a rip. And especially if they're just independently opposed to it, then
I'm curious, what is the reputation, since we of the Valley delegation, whether it's Chuy Hinojosa, Eddie Lucio Jr., Eddie Lucio III, Mando Martinez, Oscar Guillen, or Alex Dominguez, or who's the one? Longoria, I think is the other one, and Bobby Guerra. What is the opinion, positive or negative, of any of them, or they're just nobody really cares about them, or they're not that important?
Well, I mean, despite being Democrats in a Republican-held legislature, I've worked with a lot of their staff. Their staff are very nice, polite. Obviously, whenever you're in the minority, you kind of have to be, because otherwise, if you make somebody on the other side mad, I mean, obviously, there's a little bit more influence and power to be able to, squish some of that, nonpartisan, middle of the road legislation, which does happen, unfortunately. But I would say that, I mean, generally, every member in the legislature has their own reputation. They all have their own style of doing things. There's 150 different ways of doing it. And they all kind of have their own little flavor to it. And but I wouldn't, I mean, there's only a few legislators that I guess you could really consider break the mold of just your average legislator. As far as reputations for any of those guys, some of them you could call furniture. Some of them you could call pretty dynamic, and they want to work together with some bipartisan legislation. They'll obviously file some stuff that isn't going to go anywhere because it's predominantly left leaning. And then there's also some stuff just for their district that they get passed through local and consent, which means that it's consent. Nobody's going to vote against it. It's kind of a local issue. They typically don't have any problems, getting their stuff done. Usually pretty quiet.
Yeah, the part of the reason why I'm asking this question is because we've had State Senator Eddie Lucio Jr. on our show. I mean, he hasn't said it, but the rumor mill is rampant that this will be his last term, and so there'll be some people that will run for that particular seat, depending on how it's redrawn for whatever the district. And it might be his son, Eddie Lucio III, that might run and could win. I've heard Mando Martinez. I've heard a couple of other state reps in the area that might run for that particular position. Even just earlier last week, I heard somebody that used to be that's a Republican that might actually run for that. But so I'm curious if they have a good reputation, in particular State Rep Eddie Lucio III and Mando out of Wesco. Because are they able to work with the other side? Because that's what the state Senate is. It's more of a
Diplomatic.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah, having worked in both the Senate and the House, I can tell you I like working in the House a lot more, though you get paid a little bit less. Not quite as the big fat salaries that you got in the Senate, but they're very much so. Whereas in the House, it's pretty but I would say among the two that you mentioned, Mondo versus Eddie Lucio, I think Eddie Lucio probably has the better reputation. Not that Mondo doesn't have a good reputation, but he's he was over resolutions this last session. Very friendly, definitely cares about bipartisan legislation. Has even worked behind the scenes to help make some conservative legislation better. So it's one of those things where I think from a insider perspective, I definitely think that Eddie would probably have the greater chance at taking that seat. And that's me not knowing the actual demographics of that Senate district and where the populaces are and the districts. Mm-hmm. But from that perspective,
it'll just depend on redistricting.
It's all going to depend on that, and that you're looking at that across the state.
Yeah. This will probably be our last question, I guess. Well, maybe a couple more because I think we have some comments. Sure. Doc's question is, are there any major infrastructure projects in Texas is looking for federal funding that was not provided by the current administration?
No. There's definitely a lot of infrastructure projects that are going on. That's one of those issues, especially at the federal level. Obviously, the Trump administration put through some stuff where it's a lot easier. It doesn't take decades to get a project approved now. The National Transportation Agency announced that last year. In Texas, there's definitely a lot of transportation needs, and but I can't. None of them really come to the top of my mind in regards to public transit. But I do know that TexRail is one of those that is a private funded endeavor that they've been trying to get through. And there's a lot of stuff from the legislature that they've basically been trying to keep the legislature out of it. And that would be a high-speed rail that goes from Houston to DFW. Area, and it's supposed to be all public funded. A lot of conservatives are not for that. One, because there's a lot of private property rights with the use of local annexation and taking away private property to build that rail, and there's no guarantee that they're not going to fail and then want the state to then come bail them out, which is, in my opinion, highly likely, considering their business plan of wanting to charge like $400, $500, $600 per ticket. I don't know who's going to take a high-speed rail versus just an airplane or a bus and pay those kind of fees. So,
Marty, do you have a question? No? Okay. Cruz, next.
I've got a kind of a weird question for you. I don't know whether this has actually come across anybody's desk or not. How do you feel about a practicing attorney having to give up their license to run for a legislative office? Because being in the judicial branch and not giving up their license would be a constitutional conflict of serving two branches of government. And of course, being a judicial officer, their oath is to the judicial branch.
Well, I don't think that, as a practicing attorney, if I'm listening correctly, are they a practicing attorney, or are they an attorney who is a judge running for the legislature?
Well, no, not including somebody that runs in a judicial position, that they're an attorney, they're running for a judge or whatever. But I'm talking about specifically judicial officer running for a legislative position?
He would
Isn't
have
there a
to
constitutional conflict there, serving two branches of government?
But you're not necessarily serving two branches. You're just, you're a lawyer.
I'll say the easy answer to that also is you would actually run into constitutional issues on the other side of that, whereas the legislature is a volunteer position. Though they do get paid something, it would pretty much disqualify any attorney, which, no offense to the attorneys out there. The legislature is made up of quite a few of them, and they write the law for attorneys. And
Exactly. That's my hope.
yeah,
Reason for trying to block practicing attorneys
right.
in a different branch of government.
Right. And so though I very much so empathize with that, I don't think that you would be able to get that through, even if it was. And I don't think that would be a constitutional issue, because again, it's a volunteer position. And so they would basically be forfeiting their careers, their way of life, how they make money for their families to be able to go down and serve. Basically what you'd be doing is just barring any attorney period from, serving in the legislature, which is
a good,
which might be a good thing.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, but it would be unconstitutional. You couldn't do that.
And speaking of family, as a matter of fact, there is an attorney, and I won't name names, was asked about a family law bill that, I'll say she introduced, and she was asked, why are you introducing this? It'll cause so much conflict within family law. Mm-hmm. And her response was, it makes us money.
Yeah.
Conflict makes us money.
Who was this? Local?
I'll tell you offline.
Okay. Can you put the last couple of comments that we have, and then we can say goodbye, if that's okay? Because I know there were a couple of, I read once that for every one letter written, you take it as representing 20 people who care for the issue, but didn't take the time to write a letter. Do you all think that's that's truth or true?
Sorry. So I definitely think letter writing is effective. If you write a letter to somebody that is not your state representative, sometimes it will just go right in the trash, or sometimes it will be one of those things where it's like, good to know, file it away with the others, which is next to the trash. But you may even get a respectfully referred letter, which is common in the legislature, where they'll just attach a little thing and say, hey, this is your constituent, they wrote us, which will just be a duplicate letter of what you sent to your representative as well as the other representatives. And if you send them to a bunch of representatives, then you may get a bunch of them to your office, and it's kind of like
Yeah, and I actually would like to elaborate on that, because I think when I was in the legislature, as I started on the very bottom as an aide and went to the top as a chief of staff and a chief committee clerk. Those letters are very important, very crucial. Again, it just depends on how important and relevant your member makes them. So for me, staff would read the letters. I knew of every letter that came in. I read them, and staff filed them. They always stayed filed up until the end of session, because you never know. You just never know if that letter will serve any significance in the process. And if I'm asked, did we hear from because let's just say there's one topic and it's a contentious topic. They start asking, well, is your constituency asking? Is this important? Are they writing to you? Well, guess what? I'm not going to say, well, I threw it away because it was insignificant. It was just a letter. Someone took the time and effort to express themselves. And it was very important for them that our boss knew what was happening and what they thought about it. Most of the time, people were in favor or they were against, regardless. It wasn't up to me to decide whether or not it was insignificant. So there was times, though, that, believe it or not, there was one occasion where there was a topic that was being discussed, and I was asked, did anybody write? And I'm in the middle of writing some talking points. Randomly, boss walks in and says, did anyone write on this? And guess what? I just tell staff, hey, did we get something on this? Can you look it up? And we had this really good filing system. And I believed in the old school way. I think my staff also integrated some technology into how we maintain some of those letters. But they found it, pulled out a folder, and we're like, these are the number of people that wrote on this matter. Sometimes that envelope was empty. And when it was empty, that meant your constituents aren't concerned about this. And if it was a call log, we're like, well, look, we got 100 calls on this. 50, 60 said yes, 30 said no. And that's an indicator for all members, if they're going to be paying attention to what their constituents are saying other than the lobby. And that helps them. If they're in a deadlock, they don't know what to do. They're just like, this is probably a very difficult, most of the time they're difficult issues. And so if the constituents are speaking up, they'll know more or less how to proceed forward. And it makes it easier for them to be able to take their position when it comes to voting. But I always like doing them, to be honest. I like reading them. I wanted to read what they had to say. Sometimes they were bad. But I mean, it comes with the territory. I mean, you're working to serve the people of the state, and you're working to serve the people that you represent, your community, your neighbors. And I always took that job very seriously. And probably the most rewarding part was knowing what they had to say more than anybody else. So.
Yeah, and I want to echo that, and please forgive my cynicism if that was coming through a little bit thick. But Madi is absolutely correct. It is very important, and writing letters is the most effective way that you can do that. And one thing that I always like to tell people is that one way that you know that your letters are coming across, effectively, follow up with a phone call. Hey, did you get my letter? He was talking about this, because I would like to talk to you about, and I actually elaborate on that letter, making sure that you understand where I'm coming from as your constituent.
Yeah. But I will also say, don't have them on the phone for 10 minutes.
No, don't do that either.
Quick, 30 seconds to a minute, and let them go, because they got other things to do.
Yep.
And there's a lot that goes into running an office. And although we would love to speak to everybody that will call, sometimes I need my staff to work on other things, and the calls are nonstop. Calls were nonstop. Every second, every minute, phone is ringing for that exact same reason. There are people in our great state that believe that they have a voice in this system and in the process, and they exercise it. And I applaud them and I commend them, and I'm thankful for them, because I would not know certain things if they would not be calling and letting me know. Sometimes the issues of North Texas are not the issues of South Texas, but sometimes that issue will get on the floor where it will involve all of Texas. And so if we weren't aware of it, I don't know how to educate my boss on it other than him speaking to the member directly as to, hey, what's going on in your side of town that I'm getting calls about this. I mean, it happened when you had the hospital district from McAllen or Hidalgo County when they were trying to push that hospital taxing district on us a couple of sessions ago. And you had members in the County Affairs Committee saying to a House member from McAllen, hey, you're telling me people are in your district want it, but they're calling me telling me they don't. That happened, people.
Absolutely.
You don't need to just call your member. You need to call everybody who has an influence in those committees and on the floor.
Committees is a big deal. Make sure that especially if there's a piece of legislation that you care about, make sure to call the committee as well, and the members of that committee, because that is important in the overall process.
Mm-hmm. Zach, are you a Cowboys or a Texans fan? Is what Doc is asking.
Cowboys fan.
Yeah, there you go. And that'll be our last question, if that's okay, guys. Thank you so much, Zach. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to mention now? And if not, you can save it for the next time you're on, hopefully sometime next month, when the legislature gets back together. And when we close out, Cruz, if you don't mind putting the video, that'll close us out. Don't go anywhere, Zach. That way we can chit chat for a moment after the show is over. I appreciate each and every one of you. Madi, is there any announcements or anything like that you want to say?
No, other than
No?
pray for me, so I figure out what my next step will be. So,
Okay. All right.
that's all I ask everybody.
And then Cruz?
Everything's good. The ballot board met for the final tally of mail-in votes for the runoffs. So those runoffs are in the can. And as a matter of fact, I'll email you a copy of the latest.
Okay, that works. Zach, you get the last word. Anything?
Yeah, so thank you so much, and I will absolutely be honored to come back on and join you guys anytime you'd like to have me. And one thing that I encourage everyone to do, especially as practicing Christians, is we need to pray for our legislators and our staffers because they do sacrifice a lot. They're away from their families. They're away from friends. They're away from their communities to go down into the People's Republic of Austin to fight for you. So please pray for them, and those that you don't necessarily agree with. There, a bunch of Democrats down there that you may not agree with them. Pray for them as well. They need it. So that's my last word.
Awesome.
Thank you guys
Good
so
job.
much.
Hey, very welcome. God bless you all, and we'll see you all tomorrow's Friday. We will not be having an early show. We're going to more than likely have a late show. We will not do the 7:30 show on Friday. We'll let you all please do us a favor and like Ray Martinez's and Sharky Virial's page. They will be starting their second show. On their page. So make sure you like their page. It's a talk show RGV style. I don't know the actual thing. If you're my personal friend and you're on my Facebook friend list, you'll see it there. Scroll down. I posted it yesterday. Please like their page. Support them as they venture out on their own. So God bless you all. We'll see you all tomorrow. Cruz, don't forget to play that video right now when we say goodbye.
Good night.
This is Real Politics.